Hello everyone, this is Isaac White, and today we are going to be spilling the tea here at the Crockett Tavern Museum in Morristown, Tennessee. Stay tuned. Tea drinking has a long and varied history. And in fact, we see that there are many different cultures with many different stories as to the origin of tea and the practice of drinking it itself. One such story passed down to us from 2737 BC states that one day the Emperor Shenong was drinking a bowl of boiled water. This was commonplace, for he had issued a decree for himself and all of his subjects to boil their water before drinking it. As he was drinking his beverage, all of a sudden some leaves flew down from a tree and landed in his water, thus changing the color and the taste. The emperor took a sip and was delighted with the taste and its restorative properties, and thus tea and the practice of tea drinking became commonplace. However, that's just one of many stories, and again, we see that these different stories and legends, origins, if you will, they spread across many cultures throughout different time periods. And in fact, we even see that tea drinking was commonplace in North America even before Christopher Columbus. This is evidenced by finds dating as far back as 1050 AD in regards to the southeastern Native Americans consuming tea, or a caffeinated beverage as we would know it today. So there's this one particular plant that is actually referred to as the only naturally occurring native plant in North America that is caffeinated, and that is yopon. Now, the Native Americans would make tea out of various different plants, but yopon was the only one that really had any caffeine in it. Now, I'm sure a lot of you out there have accidentally consumed a little too much caffeine all in one go, and you know the side effects: shakiness, jitters, possibly even nausea, which makes you want to throw up. Well, the same thing happened with the natives, and we see that because they didn't consume caffeine on a regular basis, as opposed to what we do today, that when they would make this yopon tea, they would consume it in great quantities for these ritualistic cleansing purposes. Because, well, when they drank too much of that drink, the caffeine caused them to get sick to their stomach, and they would puke. Now, interestingly enough, we see a bit of a confusion when the early European settlers and colonists arrived here. They saw this ritual going down, and they thought that because they were puking after drinking this, it was poisonous. But in fact, it was just caffeine overload. And a weird side tidbit here that I've learned throughout the years of studying this particular topic: in some cases, the Native Americans, who were prone to gamble on and place bets on a lot of things, they would even go so far as to place bets before the ceremony took place as to who could projectile vomit the furthest. Come on, guys, surely you could have bet on something else. But regardless of that, so we see this little thing going on in North America with the Native Americans and their yopon. And it was supposed to have cleansed them inside as well as out. But the majority of the teas that we know of today, they come from China and northern Myanmar, which are both part of the Indo-Chinese peninsula. These are among some of the most popular teas, and they really didn't start to spread until Portuguese priests and merchants ended up establishing a trading post, or a post of commerce, in Macau in around 1557. From there, tea and word of the drink, cha, as it was called, and I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, I'm sorry, but it spread quickly. However, interestingly enough, when these merchants and priests were coming back home, there's no recorded examples of them actually bringing any samples or seeds of that plant home. It wasn't until later in the 16th century where we see that the British tried to monopolize on the tea industry, and they tried to beat out China, which previously had the monopoly on tea. They ended up going to India instead, and they established a huge trade in tea. If any of you have ever heard of the East India Company or the tea companies of that time, then that's exactly what it's all about. And it was one of those things that they prided themselves at being the first to not only sell tea, or not even to drink tea, but to commercialize it. Now, don't get me wrong, especially in the areas where they were growing said tea, there were two prominent tribes, the Singpo and the Khamti, who actually stated and validated that they had been drinking and growing tea long before these tea companies came along. However, this does not corroborate with the fact of the matter that it doesn't matter whether or not you've been drinking it or growing it. The British were doing it on an industrial scale. So much so that they actually promised anyone who wished to come and take part in the tea trade or own farmland to grow said tea, they promised them huge tracts of land with which they could settle on in these Indian provinces. But from there, we see that tea really starts to spread across the world, and it's about the 1650s to the 1670s where tea finally makes its way and grabs a permanent foothold into a country that is still known today to be great consumers of tea, and that is England. Now, from there in England, it spread across the ocean to the American colonies, which, of course, as I'm sure you know, had a little bit of a love-hate relationship there. We see that even from the very beginning, pre-Revolutionary War, that there were taxes placed on tea, and the American colonists did not care for it. But prior to all this stuff, which would lead up to the Revolutionary War, we see that, like many things, whether it be bananas, pineapples, tomatoes, what have you, anything that was new on the market and definitely took a lot of travel and transport, well, it was going to become very popular. It was going to become very luxurious and highly prized by the rich. And so to say that tea at one point was a luxury would be an understatement, because it was not uncommon for the well-to-do to actually have bricks of pressed tea hanging from the walls of their house as a sign of wealth. And if you don't believe me, we actually have some examples of historical documents which not only mention tea bricks being hung up on walls or from fireplace mantles, but if you look on the back here, you'll actually see that there are lines that segment the brick of pressed tea leaves into different blocks. And so what one could do, if they were in a pinch and they didn't have any coin on hand to make a purchase, they could break off or cut off these little bricks of tea, like so, in order to make any specific kind of purchase or trade. Now, with all that being said, tea was all over the place, and at one point the American colonies were awash in tea. In fact, you couldn't even make your way down the streets of Boston or New York without seeing tea hanging up in the shop's windows every few feet. But when it came down to the taxation issue, we see that, of course, the Americans, they were not going to pay the taxes, and they thought they were unjust, which inevitably led to the Boston Tea Party. On a quick side note, we see that aside from the Boston Tea Party, there was another tea party that took place in North America, or America, during the Revolutionary War, which ended up being almost as big of a deal as the Boston Tea Party was, and it took place in Yorktown. But perhaps we'll have to do another video on that sometime later. But interestingly enough, despite all that, we see that, of course, America went to war with Great Britain over certain issues of taxation without representation, tea being one of them. And then finally we see in 1778 that the British passed the Tax Repeal Acts in 1778, which repealed a lot of these taxation issues, including the one on tea. But of course, unfortunately, it was already too late, as the Revolutionary War had been going on for quite a few years now. But regardless, we see that even in England, they ended up repealing the tax on tea there in 1785. But that basically seemed like it was going to be the final nail in the coffin for the tea trade, because now there's not hardly any money to be made in it, you're not getting taxes paid on it, so it seemed like at that point that tea had gone down, never to rise again. Or so one would think. Because from 1993 to the present day, we see that the tea industry has yet again been booming. No longer is it considered unpatriotic to drink tea, as it would have been during the time of the American Revolution. Now you can drink tea for pure relaxation, enjoyment, or for various health issues or ailments. But Now, tea has transformed itself from something that used to be a luxury to a statement against improper taxation without representation, and now is a billion-dollar industry. But, with that being said, if you like your sweet tea or what have you, well, thank God you don't have to pay any excess taxes on it to the extent that you would have had to back then. But aside from all that, folks, this concludes today's little episode, and we want to thank you so much for coming along, especially on Facebook and YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated. We can't thank you guys enough. Now, before I do sign off for today's video, I do want to let you know that we have a special announcement today, because next Tuesday, April 14th, the Crockett Tavern Museum here in Morristown, Tennessee is going to be opening back up to the public for its 2026 season. And if you can't tell by the fact I look like a possum eating bumblebees with my grin here, I'm excited. Well, needless to say, we'll be open April 14th, and if you haven't memorized them by now, or if you're new to the channel, our hours of operation are from Tuesday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. We do charge a small admissions fee, of course, $5 for adult, $4.50 for seniors and veterans, and $1 for children ages 5 through 18. But, excuse me. But with that being said, folks, we also have a lot of wonderful events planned for this upcoming year. We're going to have some extra help aside from the folks at the David Crockett Birthplace State Park, such as some of the fellows from Cumberland Gap and Martin Station. But of course, we are going to be reopening the Tours Tuesday segments, wherein we'll keep you updated on all of our upcoming events. And if you happen to miss out on those videos, don't fret, we'll be making those posts available to the public on both Facebook and YouTube. So with that being said, at any given point, feel free to mark your calendars down for a day to come on out here to the Crockett Tavern Museum and step back in time to the early life of David Crockett. But until I get to see y'all at some point, some way, shape, or form, this is Isaac White signing off for now, saying goodbye and God bless.